Hi, everybody. This is Adam Ellenboss from Nightlight Astrology. It's Tuesday, February 5th today, and I'm taking some questions, actually just one question today from a viewer who's asking about the 12th house. So I figured it would be a good time to discuss the 12th house. It comes up a lot in questions that I get from all of you. People are often really concerned about the 12th house, have a lot of misconceptions about the 12th house, and then sometimes we'll have questions about how to interpret planets in the 12th house. So hopefully this will help, and we'll give you a few good things to think about with regard to planets in the 12th house. I'm going to go ahead and put the chart up on the screen so that you can see it. And let me go ahead and read the question. So Martina is what to recommend to a person who has a stellium in the 12th, especially personal planets in the play. I myself have this, being constantly ill and health issues from childhood on. But I have, although a friend with this constellation living a not very legal, quite narcissistic lifestyle, both not very nice. So the second accompanying question had to do with planets at the end of degrees. So Martina, I'm only going to take your first one this time. We've talked about anaretic degrees before. So I'll take your question about the 12th house. First of all, one little thing that I would mention, and maybe it's a trifling point. Let me move my camera a little bit there. It might be a little bit of a trifling point, but all planets are personal. And there's sometimes a little bit of a misconception in modern astrology that some planets are personal and some planets are transpersonal. I've already gone over this in the past too, so I don't want to harp on it, but any planet can indicate things that are deeply personal, and any planet can be considered personal, and any planet can be considered transpersonal. The distinction between personal and transpersonal is in some ways a very new idea, and it's not to my mind, it's a distinction that's interesting, talking about the personal and the transpersonal, but it's not, I don't think it's appropriate to apply that distinction to planets. That's my own opinion, take it or leave it. So at any rate, any planet can be personal or transpersonal. So any planets in the 12th house could have a deeply personal effect on your life, and any outer planets in the 12th house could have the same effect. It doesn't inner traditional planets, outer modern planets, either one. So in order to understand the 12th house, let's break something down really quick. A planet in the 12th house, by its zodiacal motion, sometimes called its secondary motion, moving through the zodiac, is gazing upon the first house, or it's moving toward it. This is language that I'm taking from the late and great astrologer Robert Schmidt, who was one of the original translators of the Hellenistic source text into English over the past 3 decades or so. And this is one of the ways that he helped us to understand what ancient astrologers were really getting at. So think about it first like this. The planet, in its secondary motion through the zodiac, it has an intention. It's moving somewhere, it's going somewhere. This is why, for example, when planets go retrograde, they start to go backward, their plans are foiled. Try to go get to the airport on time and there's traffic or whatever. So the planet's secondary motion through the zodiac, moving from one sign to the next, represents its intentionality, its direction, its volition, in a sense, the idea, or the symbolic idea of its will. So the planet in the 12th is intending toward the first. However, the primary motion of the sky, which is much stronger, much swifter, you might say, it's much faster, is carrying the planet away from the ascendant. So the rotation of the Earth on the axis is going to carry the planet in the 12th house continually upward from the rising place in the east over here, all the way up to the top of the chart, and then all the way down, and then all the way down to the bottom, and then all the way up again, round and round. The planet in the 12th is therefore moving toward the ascendant, intending toward it, looking at it, going toward it, but being carried away by the faster, stronger primary motion, which carries everything up and everything down and round again in 24 hours. The planet's secondary motion through the zodiac can't go that fast. Even the moon, which is very swift, takes a couple of days to go through a sign, right? So, but we understand this duality of motion in every house to be representative of it's like an archetypal scenario that's helping us understand the topics of the house. So, for example, the 12th house throughout the history of astrology has been associated with self-undoing. It was actually traditionally called the Malas Daemon, or the bad spirit, and it is associated with anything that may carry you off and throw you off course. Remember that the planet is intending toward the first house, which was called steering wheel. I'm going to try to make a steering wheel like a steering wheel of a boat, let's say. So it was called the helm, and it's the place where the native is in control. It's the navigational hub of the chart, so to speak. And it represents the helm of the ship, or the place where you would steer with the rudder. Now, the planet here is intending toward that place, right? But it's getting swept away from it. And hence the 12th house often depicts a loss of control, the desire to be in control, but getting swept away. And this is why it's associated with self-undoing, or anything that may carry us off. It's also associated, for example, with enemies who steal things from you. In the ancient tradition, the planets in the 12th house might indicate thieves or enemies, or people who come and take your property or possession, or you might have to give up your property or possession to the courts or something like that. In a sense, it's also indicated by the planet kind of symbolically intruding upon the first and then zipping away, being carried off again. So someone who comes into your house, the first house, which is the native's house always, everything else is sort of belonging to other people, other domains of fate, siblings, family, spouse, money, etc. But the first house is your house. So it's about a planet that's kind of impeding upon your space and then carrying something off. Hence, the general name is evil spirit. The 12th house is also called the joy of Saturn, for this reason, that it can kind of carry you off. And there's a certain, you could associate it with something like shipwreck, losing your handle on the steering wheel, so to speak. So the 12th house is associated with those themes, and that's why it has a difficult reputation. In the ancient world, it was considered a bad house. Bad meaning the world that we live in is filled with good and bad fortune, and the chart is here to tell you about the allotment of your life, the allotment of fate, the good and the bad things that will happen in different areas of your life. Of course, the cultivation of transcendental consciousness, which is what astrology is here to cultivate in us by the study of fate, we come to realize that who we are and our true happiness is not defined by the things that were allotted, good or bad. But knowing about those things, we also have to be honest and accurate about those things. And the 12th house is a place that describes some of the things in life that we don't like, when people carry off with our stuff, or we lose something, or we lose control, we lose the plot. For example, a famous celebrity that has both the sun and Jupiter in the 12th house is Kanye West. Now here's someone who has the tendency to lose the plot sometimes, and he's actually had some serious mental health problems as well. I'm not trying to be a gossip or judge him, but that's a 12th house challenge. What to speak of the sun as a paternal image, and some of the struggles that he had with his father, if I remember correctly. So there's a story around his dad, and I can't remember what it is, but that's not the point. The 12th house, however, when something carries us off course, the loss of ego and the loss of control, just like Saturn is associated with contemplatives and mystics, and the loss that breeds a deeper contemplative life, the things that carry us off can, like Saturn, be a part of a mystical or spiritual education. So it's not that the 12th house is altogether bad and there's nothing salvageable, or that you can't get some, there might be a shipwreck, but maybe there's something to salvage. There's some precious cargo to salvage. But it is a very difficult house associated with slavery, where you're carried off into a foreign land, and taken out of control of your life. It's associated with hospitals and prisons, or places where you go where you have to be carried off because of illness or disease, or a psychiatric break. It's associated with the dark night of the soul, where you lose the light a little bit. Now, that's a sort of archetypal meaning of the 12th house. So first of all, when people ask, what do I do about the 12th house? The one thing that I like to make, this is where the philosophy of my own practice comes in, and it's rooted in what ancient astrologers were saying about fate and destiny, which is that most of the time, we don't have a lot of control over our destiny. Our karma allots us certain kinds of results in life, good and bad. We have to try to face them, which is with as much dignity and serenity and kind of equanimity of heart and mind as possible. And that's not easy. It's not easy at all. I don't mean to, sound like I've got it figured out, but the 12th house is a place where when people ask for advice, it's almost better to hold space for people and to kind of, commiserate and show empathy, than it is to say, oh yeah, well, you can just do this and this and this. You see, the reason you're in this is just because you don't love yourself, or, so this kind of like, blame, right? Like you got yourself into this situation, so you can fix it if you just go to an empowerment class, make a vision board, and believe in your life, or something like that. I'm not suggesting also that there is nothing that can be done, but a lot of what the 12th house issues boil down to is the willingness in the heart and mind to accept the reality of suffering, which is of the utter most difficult things to do. And yet that's what our great spiritual teachers have taught us, like the Buddha, Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, Christ, Mother Teresa. Great sages, saints, poets have always told us that that suffering has a secret in the midst of it, and that is also passion. The word passion, I was watching a colleague talk about the word passion recently. The word passion actually means both pain and endurance. It has those meanings, and it has a association with the word patience. Passion is where we stick with something even though it hurts. There's a burning, but it's almost like the way I wrote about it the other day was that in passion, there's a flower, the passion flower. It's fiery and it hurts, but it blossoms within us when we bear with something. We bear with something that hurts. So learning how to be present is, I think, very, very important, because the art of presence is within the range of our freedom. That's always something we can do, whatever our chart may say. We can always cultivate a spiritual vibration, and we can do that through very simple things that don't require very much facility in life. Chanting, singing, prayer, meditation, mindfulness. These are things that they're of the most value and require the least amount of facility around us. It could be in a prison cell, as I'm launching into working with prisoners, yoga in the prisons in the next month. I've been thinking a lot about this. And, the whole point of bringing yoga into prisons is to help people find a deep well of freedom within a place that feels encaged. And so the 12th house sometimes associated with prisons and entrapment and the feeling of there being no way out, or of having lost the plot. But acceptance and working on the discovery of freedom and consciousness is the best way to deal with the 12th house problem, in my opinion. Of course, seeking help for addiction, seeking therapy, seeking friends, seeking all of the common things that we do to try to help ourselves out of a jam in life are appropriate, right? But But there's no easy solution to suffering. And we can't whitewash the 12th house into meaning, oh, it's all unicorns and mystical experiences. And we can't give easy remedies for deep existential problems like suffering. I think about how deeply the Buddha respected the reality of suffering, and how deep it is to really take the medicine that he suggested, that the Buddha suggested, the middle path, the path of surrendering to the reality of suffering and learning how to cultivate a kind of freedom in its midst. That is of the most difficult medicines to swallow, you know. It's not easy. So there's not a one size fits all solution to 12th house problems. But the 12th house calls us to spiritual life, just like Saturn does, in very deep and profound ways. It is a profound house, and there's really no way out but through. That's my feeling on it. So that's my thoughts on the 12th house and what you can do, you know, to remedy the 12th house. Spiritual life and the commitment of spiritual life, and trying to raise the vibration of your consciousness to be in touch with one's true nature and one's inherent freedom in relation to the divine source of which we are a part. That work becomes necessary when you're lost or off track a little bit, or have lost the steering wheel, so to speak. And that's in many traditions considered a blessing, a boon, a gift, actually, to be thrown off course. Because sometimes when we feel like we're on course and we're in control of everything, well, sometimes there's no need to cultivate spiritual life. We don't have the sense of urgency that we should. So I don't think the 12th house is altogether bad, even though on a subjective level, it's not really fun in human terms. You know, most of us would rather have a piece of cake. So, so not easy. One other thing to note is that planets in the 12th house also vary quite a bit, and they don't inherently mean that you're going to suffer. They can be indications that a spouse may suffer, that a father or sibling may suffer, or that you may work in a 12th house environment, or they can indicate something about financial losses. Or in modern astrology, we have a tendency to take every single factor in the chart as a commentary about us. And a lot of the times in life, there are things that happen around us within our field of karma, within our communities, our friends, our families, different areas of our life that affect us more or less personally. And, you know, hashing out those details takes a little nuance and subtlety sometimes. So in this chart that you're looking at, for example, just a simple thing to note is that the ascendant ruler, right, with Aquarius rising, is Saturn, who is in the 12th house. But Saturn's in its joy in the 12th house, and Saturn is in its own sign in the 12th house. And this is a daytime chart with the sun having just risen. So that's a Saturn that may indicate a different kind of relationship with the 12th house. There may be elements of losing the plot or falling off course or dealing with illness or what have you that are typical for having the ascendant ruler, which is like the captain of the ship, separated from the steering wheel. It might indicate someone who likes to be alone a little bit more, or whose need for contemplation and solitude is very strong. But, you know, it doesn't, the tendency to be a little bit divorced from the control factor when Saturn's very well dignified insect in its joy in the 12th house can sometimes indicate a more mystical or contemplative mood that the individual has, a psychology that's a little bit more detached from the world, not needing to control everything. It could indicate a lot of other things as well, but I'm just using this example so that you can also see that having the ascendant ruler in the 12th really well dignified is a totally different story from, say, having a different planetary situation like this. I'm going to show you another situation. So if we go forward about another hour, then we have the sun and Mercury in the 12th house. So let me see if I can, oh, here we go, hold on. All right, there we are. So now you can see the sun and Mercury in the 12th house. And for example, Mercury is the ruler of the 7th house of marriage. So the 7th house ruler is under the beams of the sun, combust in the 12th house. The ruler of the ascendant is not in the 12th house. And the sun does not necessarily mean anything super personal. It could, but it doesn't have to necessarily. But let's just say in this case, Mercury in the 12th house, some people might say, oh, you're going to be like a head case. You're going to have mental or emotional problems because, oh, the 12th house. People, say things like this. They'll make it personal. But this could very well be an indication, for example, of somebody who marries somebody who has health problems or who becomes an enemy, that their spouse becomes someone who's a little bit of a thorn in the side, someone who brings them off course, or someone who represents a little bit of a bad choice, or the potential that for a spouse who, with Mercury in the 12th house, it could even be a spouse who works in a hospital. Like I've seen that. I've seen every example that I've given is something that I've actually seen in charts. But it may, in other words, Mercury here may have something to do with the spouse and not necessarily with the individual. Mercury also rules the 4th house. Sometimes you might see a dual connection between the father and the spouse, or the parents and the spouse in the 12th house. I had a client like this one time that was Jupiter ruling both the 4th and the 7th, with Jupiter in the 12th. Father worked in a hospital, spouse worked in a hospital, and she ended up actually living on the campus of a hospital in like a staff home that was it was like a residence hospital. So her home, her family, her father, all in the area of the 12th house, worked and lived in a hospital, and then her spouse ended up working in a hospital, and she ended up living in a hospital. So, again, you have to be very careful that you don't just look at the 12th and go like, oh, like I'm screwed, or studying ancient astrology, by the way, another plug for my upcoming program in June on Sundays. Studying ancient astrology helps you know the differences between these kinds of things, which a lot of times people don't know because they make the mistake of thinking every last single thing in the birth chart is about me and my inner brain and workings and psychology. And it's not. There's some things are, some things aren't. So at any rate, I hope that this was interesting for everybody. Thank you again. What was it, Martina? Was it Martina? Thank you, Martina, for your question about the 12th house, and I hope that this helped. Take care, everyone. Have a nice night.